So good morning, Julie Gantz. Thank you so much again for joining us here today to celebrate and talk about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And as you are a CSO employee, we want to provide all of Proliance employees recognition to celebrate his day for the new year of 2023 with our DEI committee. And so we have a question to ask, and the question is, what impact has Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. have had on your life, and how has his legacy personally affected you?
Yes, thank you for the question. My name is Julie Getz. I'm a senior financial analyst on the CSO team. And I could talk for days about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and how his legacy continues to live through my personal life today, but I recognize we don't have enough time for that. And so I will drill it down into two main things that personally affect me. So the first one is how lucky and blessed I feel to wake up today in 2002 and pick up my voter's registration card and go to the polls and vote without harassment and for my candidates of choice. I recognize that that's not something our grandparents could, could talk about because it did not exist. So personal liberties such as voting, marrying whoever you choose to marry. So it's personal for me because I'm in an interracial relationship. I'm married to a white man. I recognize that before June 12, 1967, that was illegal. And so I do not take it for granted today, knowing that I get to choose who to love, and I can do it without fear of harassment in America. And I am very hopeful about my son, who is now 2 years old, growing up in a better America. And this is deeply touching because I know that that was one of the things that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. dreamed about in his famous I Have a Dream speech. He dreamt of an America where white boys and girls could hold hands together, and that's literally what I'm living right now with the love of my life. That was not possible before 1967. The other thing is his emphasis on education and how lack thereof is one of the biggest vices in society. I recognize that I'm where I am today because I've had the opportunities to go to school and not just pursue a bachelor's, but also a master's degree. There are people who could not do that even if they had the will to do that before. So this is something I am deeply thankful for. And as a result of that, I also founded my own nonprofit, which is Getz Foundation, which specifically targets children in Africa to help further their education. And this was inspired by Dr. King. And so I have hope for the future. I have a lot of hope for a better America. But as live and as strong as his message was back in the 60s, I think it still is strong today because there's still a lot of work to be done. And living in this country every day, I am grateful, but I also recognize that we still have steps to take towards a more just community. And I am proud of Dr. King for giving me the courage to speak my voice and for giving me a hope for a better future and for making my life today possible because he dreamed. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your experience and the message that you have touched on, the three factors. June 12th of 1967, you are absolutely correct. Your message here will be inspiring so many Proliance employees, and thank you again for sharing your experience and continuing his dream, which is serving many Americans, and it should serve every American here in the United States and every single Proliance employee, and that is our goal. So once again, thank you again, Julie Getz, for sharing your life and your goals and perpetuating Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream.
Thank you, and happy Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
And as we are celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day for 2023, we'd like to follow up with this interview question. And again, thank you for your time today. So what impact has Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had on your life, and how has his legacy affected you?
Well, just remembering Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and reading about him, obviously, I wasn't around when he was alive. And of course, his untimely death at a very young age has, it always brings memories of what it was back then and how grateful we are of what we have today. And I do believe a lot of what he did and what he sacrificed and he taught the world at the time has had lasting impacts, including how we are enjoying the freedom and the great world and the country that we live in today. But the way it impacted me was, of course, we immigrated earlier on in my life. And, you know, when you come to a new country, you really don't know what to expect. And you really want to cling on to your hope and dreams. And, you know, his speeches always remind you to continue to dream and dream for a perfect world. But, you know, like I tell a lot of my colleagues, you have this vision of a perfect world in your mind, but it's the journey to that perfect world that's really going to make the biggest differences in your life, because those are real, right? So that's what I feel I'm living today, that journey to what I believe is a perfect world in my mind, and just trying to be available for those who need my assistance to also help them get to their dream as well. So.
Thank you. Yes, so through that journey, there is great reward. So again, thank you so much for your time today here to share your experience and how Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has affected you. And we will gladly and happily add this to our collection for Proliance to share in 2023. So thank you again and have a great day.
Vipuna, thank you so much, and happy Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, everyone. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for sharing your experiences and how it has impacted your practice here at Proliance. What impact has Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had on your life, and how has his legacy personally affected you?
Well, I'm Dr. Jim Pritchett, and I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I practice mostly in downtown Seattle, but I also have an office in Kirkland. I've been with Proliance Surgeons for 10 years. I've been in practice, though, for 39 years, and before that, I worked in a doctor's office. So quite a bit of experience in healthcare. And I'm pleased to participate, and I'm happy to celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. Day. I drove across Martin Luther King Jr. Street today on my way to work, and I remember when it was named that, following his death back in 1968. So he's had a big impact on my life. People my age in particular, this is a real person. He really was around. I met him when I was 9 years old at the Olympic Hotel where my grandmother worked, and he's real to me. The more important thing is how he informs my medical practice, which does every day I practice. Many people know that he was very concerned about inequality and injustice as it applied to healthcare. And that's been a real interest of mine. I've been fortunate enough to have a practice that's done well enough. We've been able to see patients regardless of who they are, ability to pay, whatever they come from, we can accommodate them. That's become even more of a challenge in recent years, as we've seen the number of patients in healthcare that have reasons they could have trouble fitting in. transgender now as an example of that. My practice, by seeing the bright light that Martin Luther King Jr. would cast on all of life, and particularly in healthcare, been able to really adopt that and make sure that there really isn't any healthcare injustice or inequality in any way that impacts our patients. And it's really important, probably more important than any of the other things that we deal with. Well, it is a real personal impact for me. The first doctor I worked for was Black, and he was one of the early Black surgeons in Seattle. And he was impacted as far as referral patterns, where he could go to do his surgeries, just really everything on a day-to-day basis. And so I was just a teenager when I started working in his office, but you really could see that this mattered on how things operated. And he made great steps to try and, mitigate this. The workarounds that he would do, they were impressive, and it was impactful. And I took a real position that I was going to be on the other side of that and make sure that these kind of things just didn't really happen. And it's not just with our patients. So in our practice, we're very mindful of who everybody is, and from a staff standpoint as well. So how to get along with each other respectfully, making sure that there really isn't any favoritism in how we do our jobs, and everybody's equally embraced as far as who they are, what they think, what their passions are. And we're lucky because everyone's very passionate about being in healthcare, or they wouldn't be in it. The jobs are too stressful to just take on a lark. So we're lucky. And if you come to our clinic, you really see that. Our workforce, it's a pretty good cross section. We've done a great job. And that looks pretty different than when I started in healthcare. There really wasn't, particularly at the physician level, nursing level even. But now it really does look like a good mix. You can see that our efforts, they haven't gone strong enough, of course. We still don't have full representation in women, for instance, in our clinic. If you look at our surgeons, yes, we have women surgeons, and overall our staffing reflects that. We have a ways to go, and we can't lose sight of that. We're doing much better though on ethnic diversity, but still it's not going to be truly equal in my lifetime or my practice time, but it's a goal to have, and we're getting there. All we have to just do is keep going the direction we're on and make sure we do, and not get sidetracked by some of the things that have happened, in the last few years in particular. There's been challenges to these things, and got to just not give an inch. Every interaction, every time, every staffer, every patient, all the time, you got to pay attention to this. And it has to be one of the things you value. Naturally, we're all going to focus on the health of the patient coming first, but any form of injustice or inequality has got to be addressed. And we see it in our homeless patients now. Social injustice disorder, it's a real thing. It's easy to write people off. Oh, they have a bad attitude, or they're crazy, or this and that. It's somewhat their fault where they are. And there's not good evidence that there are. There's inequality and injustice, and that breeds some of the bad behavior that we ascribe to maybe who people are. Got to get past that. Recognize that these injustices have consequences. They shape people's behavior, and the bad behavior is often from the injustice, not the other way around. They're not being treated bad because of their behavior. They've been treated bad, then their behavior follows. You have to embrace that concept and address it. Treat people well, their behavior tends to follow the treatment that they get, and we all feel better about ourselves and our patients and what we do and who we are. It's the clinics today and taking care of patients today, when there is less injustice and people are more mindful of it, are better to be around. It feels good. It works well, and it's a good feeling as well. It's all positive. We keep doing it.
Absolutely, absolutely. In healthcare, that's our goal, is to provide services to everyone, no matter what race, religion, creed, sexuality. We're all here to provide services to everyone. And the goal that we have here for Proliance and our mission is to continue to strive for that and accomplish that for every practice within the company. And so I thank you so much for sharing your experience, because absolutely well said, as you had explained your experience and what you see from when you first began as a physician, when you were a resident as well, coming into Seattle here, and the experiences and diversity that you have seen is impactful, and it helps you as a physician service the patients, and the patients coming out with the best experience and service and health received through Proliance as well.
I think we're doing. We got to just keep doing it and lower the barriers of any type we have to treating our patients the way we need to treat them, and connect to them as people, not just a patient, but who they are, understand who they are, know them, and connect with them. It's really, I think I'm doing better than that over the years. Originally, stress, and you think you're too busy sometimes, but you're never too busy to look out for any little injustice or inequality that might be there and correct it. Do it right on the spot, and have your staff and your patient watch you do it and live it, not just talk about it, but actually do it minute by minute. It's a great thing to do, and works really well.
And again, thank you so much for your time here today to share how Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has had an impact on your life, on your practice, and on your personal life. So thank you so much. Have a great holiday.
Yes. Happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today, Dustin Sanders. So here for our DEI committee for 2023, we are celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And the one question that we'd like to ask you is, what impact has Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had on your life, and how has his legacy personally affected you?
Wow, it's so vast. As a kid, growing up in the 70s, there was still a lot of divide, and being taught at such a young age that peaceful resolve and togetherness was the best plan, and have this amazing example in his speeches and his writing was just, it's untapped resource of peace, and it was and remains just a constant source of goodness. Happy Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
What impact has Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had on your life, affected you?
Well, I would have to say that Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Has had an impact on my life, and legacy has affected me. As I am of desegregation, my mother was actually a social worker at that time and was involved in that. So I was very much involved in the actual, the busing and the desegregation that was occurring in the Columbus country. And through that process, and I just learned of Dr. Martin Luther King. And of course, he was contemporary with me, in terms of occurring during that time, as I then became an adult, I approached the work of Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King, in a different way, as I am a Christian. Letters to Birmingham jail that he wrote. He also is a Christian. He used scripture in those letters, and it became very, very clear to me that the Martin Luther King was in line exactly with what he was doing. And he was in my mind, he was a pastor who was way ahead of his years. In fact, way ahead of those contemporary. And so I feel as if that he was right on target with that, and that his impact was powerful then, as it is now, and continues to be so as our country evolves.
Absolutely, absolutely. And obviously with your history and the experience that his impact has, made a mark on you, obviously has true, you're passing that on down to, other family members or children that you may have. His letters, of course, when he was imprisoned, his letters to Birmingham, and his gospel has also made an impact to, millions of generations of cultures of people, race, creed, or race. And so it sounds like you have a huge and extensive history with his background, which has carried, and with you sharing your experience, and we're just so grateful for you here sharing it here today. But I also wanted to ask, how has his legacy personally affected you as well?
His legacy of carrying on that social justice in our community and around the world, it has impacted me as, and again, I regularly do international developing country prison ministries, going into prisons, giving, humanitarian aid, medical aid, bringing, the gospel to the prison. A 501c nonprofit tax exempt foundation in Colombia doing similar things, medical, our communities are extremely poor, to be able to help feed the children. We've helped to create, made a soccer field for one community where the children have really no other option in terms of their activities. They're either going to be involved in soccer, and or the other option is not very good for them in terms of it's mostly drug and drug related areas where the social justice and social equality that Dr. Martin Luther King was preaching, and I'm carrying that out as well. And it's in part we're all doing that. From my point of view, we're all doing that as it's what God calls us. But his impact is certainly there, and well recognized by me.
Thank you, and thank you so much. And that is such a huge effect, a positive effect that renders throughout the whole community, that generations of that community, for the children and the students to continue on with athletic abilities to play soccer, that would be able to help take them out of poverty or change their mindset. Experience and your how Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has played a great impact and affected you in such a great positive way.
Thanks for having
Thank
me.
you.
Yeah, absolutely. What a pleasure and an honor. Happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Thank you.
But what impact has Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had on your life, and how has his legacy personally affected you?
Yeah, so thank you, Misty, for allowing me to share this experience with you. My name is Vipuna Dagri, and I'm a revenue cycle collection specialist at Seattle Surgery Center, and I also do insurance verification. I've been with the company for a little over 15 years. And so with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and what his impact had on my life is obviously, as being part of African-American, I grew up in Hawaii. My father is Black from California, and he grew up during that era, in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And the voting right had come into effect back in 1965. And at that time, I think still African Americans were a little hesitant to vote, but in years following, many African Americans continued to vote. And I had this discussion with my father recently in this past year, that back in, I believe it was 1967 or 1968, is his mother, who at the time was in college for her master's degree, decided to cast her first vote. And so that was the first female African American in our family of, African American and Black descent that cast her vote. And my immediate family was my grandmother on my father's side. And I'm so proud of that because obviously with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s work over many years have touched many people's life all over the world, many different ethnicities, cultures, races that had an impact. And as a little girl growing up, my father had continuously educated us about Martin Luther King Jr. and his work by allowing us to read books about and some of his letters that he had written while he was also in prison, but also reading history and watching videos and documentaries about Dr. Martin Luther King. So that was a huge impact in my life. And how he had personally affected me was to learn many different cultures. And I'm also a diverse person of cultures as well. I have a Pacific Islander, Hawaiian descent, and also Asian descent and Native American descent in me. And so I have been also a part of biracial relationships, and it's been amazing. So learning other people's cultures and seeing how the world is today and how we want to move forward in the future with his impact and how he personally affected me has been a great deal. And I hope to continue to live my life a part of his legacy in the future to come in everything that I do. So thank you very much. And happy Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day to everyone at Proliance.